Hello and welcome to Spirit Pig. Inspired by the mission 7 billion fulfilled people, I track down the greatest thought leaders on the planet and interview them about happiness and fulfillment. Today I'm speaking with Oliver Burkeman. Oliver is the author of the books The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, which explores the upsides of negativity, uncertainty, failure and imperfection, as well as the book Help, How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done. He's a writer for The Guardian and has a weekly column called This Column Will Change Your Life, where he writes about social psychology, self-help culture, productivity, and the science of happiness. He's interviewed everyone from Jerry Seinfeld, Al Gore, Eckhart Tolle, 50 Cent, and Malcolm Gladwell, among many, many others. So it's a huge honor. Oliver, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me.
I heard something you said, I think it was 7 years ago, it was back in 2010, and you said the world of self-help is a really, really strange one with many very strange people, but there's some useful stuff hiding amongst there too. What got you into this line of work? How did it all start? Because soon going to find out, you probably don't fit into the box of, you can do it, come on, positivity. What got you started?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a simple, superficial answer to the question, and then the real one. I think the superficial one is, I'm a journalist. I was a journalist then. I'm interested in exploring worlds that are unfamiliar to me, and it's a world that had a lot of opportunity for it was funny and weird and eccentric, and there was lots to mock, and that was great. But I think I'd be totally disingenuous if I said that all I was doing was just doing it to mock. What I was really doing, I think, looking back, was, I wanted to engage with this stuff. I would like to know how to become happier, and I would like to know how to be more productive and better relationships and all the rest of it. The great thing about being a journalist is you can go into these worlds that you might be embarrassed to go into otherwise in some way, and you can just say, oh, it's just for research. So you have this kind of cover story that enables you to sort of plunge into these things. And, I did discover that a huge amount of it is, in my opinion, rubbish, but not all of it at all. And I wouldn't have been able to discover that, I don't think, if I hadn't been able to, find some excuse or reason to get into it. So I'm totally, at this point, totally content and happy to say that I looked into it because I wanted to be happier, because I'm as neurotic and troubled as the next person. But at the time, it was sort of done with this cover story of, I'm just investigating in an objective way or something.
I mean, you're talking about, the sort of some of some of the cheesiness that is out there. Like, now that you've dug deeper, I mean, have you been pretty surprised about what you found along the way?
I think the really interesting thing that I discovered is, it's not only that you need to keep your wits about you in this world and be very skeptical and reject things that sound very promising because actually there's something about them that isn't right. It's also the reverse. It's also that people like me, people who are sort of like to think of themselves as skeptical and you can't pull the wool over my eyes sort of stuff. Sometimes you come across stuff that's really cheesy and embarrassing, but actually does work. And actually, the research backs it up. And at some point, I think you have to choose. Are you going to say, I'm not going to keep a gratitude diary because that's totally embarrassing? Or are you going to say, well, actually it works, so maybe it's time to get over myself. I think you need to be willing to discard things, but you need to also be willing to get over your reaction, especially if you're a Brit and you're sort of slightly look down at all this stuff. Sometimes the problem is that response of yours rather than the book or the expert or the technique that you're looking at.
One of the keys and areas that you've looked at in particular, I mean, it's kind of been a theme the whole way through, but in particular in the book Antidote, is this idea that too much focus on positivity and optimism, even though that's almost been like the poster child, for years, it's all about positivity, it's all about optimism. That's actually, it's the problem, it's not the answer, isn't it? I mean, it's emerged that books of positive thinking, affirmations, actually are making a lot of people more unhappy. How so?
Well, a lot of research does back this idea up, but I would want to say the idea goes way back in philosophy and the roots of psychology. John Stuart Mill, the philosopher, said, ask yourself whether you are happy and you cease to be so. There's something about happiness such that if you really look it in the face and try to get it, that's like the worst way to obtain it. And we all have this experience of sort of realizing that yesterday or last year or something, we were incredibly happy. Something was wonderfully enjoyable, but we weren't quite conscious of that at the moment, in the moment. And really, what has been discovered by the research, I think, is just this fact that the human mind just doesn't work in this kind of mechanistic way where you tell it what to think and feel, and it thinks and feels those things. Apart from anything else, like you're the one doing the telling as well, right? So it's already a strange situation. Well, I'm going to tell myself to focus on happy thoughts. There's something odd going on there. And what they found again and again in sort of small contexts and bigger ones is that there's what's called an ironic effect. That if you spend your day really trying to think happy thoughts and scanning your mind for any trace of a negative thought, then really what happens is that negative thoughts become much more salient, and it actually turns into quite a stressful way to live. The analogy I use, and I use it in the book, is if you tell someone to not think about a polar bear for 2 minutes, almost everybody will just have to think about a polar bear. Like you can't succeed in that task. So in the same way, I'm going to go through my life avoiding failure and avoiding negativity. I'm going to only focus on happy thoughts. It's almost setting yourself up for doing the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like when we focus on eliminating negativity, we actually end up bringing about that just as a result. The thing that we're trying to avoid, that's it. Like, don't look at the negativity. Don't focus on bad. Don't focus on the bad.
And also, there's other reasons why I think positive thinking is very limited, especially at the fringes of it, where you get this idea that it's everything. That you literally don't need to worry at all about your socioeconomic circumstances or your physical health, or as long as you're focusing on the right thoughts, then reality will manifest in this perfect way. And it's actually, sometimes people accuse me of just being grumpy, and I sort of embrace it as a joke, but actually a philosophy of happiness that is more resilient, that can cope with something going wrong, instead of always trying to convince yourself that everything's going to go right. It's actually much more resilient. It means you can stay happy through, or at least, somewhat happy or stable and calm through thick and thin. And bad stuff happens to everyone at some point. So it seems crazy to me to adopt a philosophy that insists that it's not going to, because like it is. So
it was the quote, I think, by Edith Wharton, if only we stopped trying so hard to be happy, we'd have a pretty good time. So it's that.
Right, yes, exactly. It's a recipe for happiness. It is not saying resign yourself to despair. It's actually just a different route to what I think is a more profound kind of happiness. Yeah.
Well, we've seen it's getting a lot of popularity recently, especially in some of like I think it's big in like the sports scene and big in like Silicon Valley. This renewed interest in Stoicism. You see it popping up everywhere, and I mean this is back in ancient Greeks and Romans. This isn't like a new idea. But for anyone who's not familiar, what do you feel like personifies this Stoicism moving? Why is it getting such renewed excitement at the moment, do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I explore Stoicism in part of the book, The Antidote, and I think it's incredibly powerful. I think it's also limited. I don't think that just being a Stoic is probably quite enough in a way, but it has these kind of amazing insights, some of which can sound a little bit like positive thinking at first, such as that, it's not events in the world that cause us to be distressed. It's our beliefs about events in the world. Nothing ever happened to you that was bad in and of itself, except that you have a belief that it's bad. Now, at that point, a positive thinker is going to say, so just believe that everything that happens to you is good and you're fine. The Stoics were much more sophisticated than that, and they said, well, no, just understand that this is how the world is. And for a start, that's kind of liberating in a way. It makes you understand that usually you're sort of thinking catastrophically about things when actually they're just mildly negative or something like that. And also then you get this idea in Stoicism of understanding what it is you can control and what you can't. And I think we make ourselves very miserable in life by trying to exert control over the part of reality that we can't control, paying insufficient attention to what we can. Sorry, as for why it's popular now, there's lots of possibilities. I sort of tend to think that it's not really possible looking around over the last decade, whether politically, economically, environmentally, it's not really possible to look at the world and say everything's just getting better, and it's just always going to continue getting better, and that's clear. And so any sort of philosophy that is based on that is already going to seem very sort of inadequate. And the Stoics, of course, some of the original Stoics, the actual situations they had to deal with, being born and raised as a slave in one case, or being ordered to kill yourself by the Emperor Nero in another, like these were kind of hellish lives. So it's kind of natural that they developed a philosophy that could be resilient in the face of that kind of stuff. And compared to that, maybe the various nightmarish aspects of the 21st century aren't quite so bad. But I think it's really useful to have a kind of way of thinking about happiness that can deal with the shocks of reality. Okay,
I'm going to just one thing you said there, because you obviously you work for a newspaper, so I don't know if this is a sensitive topic, but do you think that things are actually getting worse, or do you think just our news cycle and we're just so much more aware of it, so we just got way better at just like be it Twitter, be it whatever, with the 24-hour news cycle, like, because there's two different schools of thoughts. Like some people are just like, on every single metric, be it safety, like education, X, Y, and Z, like we're in the best time in human history, but so many of us believe that Armageddon's around the corner. Like, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I did actually write a piece about this a few weeks ago, so this is all at the top of my mind. And I in that piece gave an airing to the idea that the media distorts our views a lot. So I'm evidently they didn't fire me at this point yet saying that. So I mean, and it's not. And again, to be clear, it's not. There are media. I don't think I work for one, but there are media that sort of systematically misrepresent what's going on. I think the more dangerous issue with the media as a whole is that it just brings us true news of bad aspects of the world that we then sort of disproportionately build our perspective on, right? So there's fake news that tells you things are happening that are not happening. But then there's just the idea that the news media is a giant machine for finding all the bad things that are happening in the world and telling them to you. And there's all sorts of reasons of evolutionary psychology, I think, why we are so compelled by awful stories, because a very long time ago in human evolutionary history, it was very important to be compelled by stories of threats that could threaten you personally. But of course, most of what you see on the news mostly is, if it's however terrible a disaster in a foreign country a long way away may be, how much it may require you to act as a good citizen and give money or something, it's probably not a threat to you. And yet we respond emotionally like it is. I mean, in that piece, I sort of ended up coming to the conclusion, I think the media and social media especially really do give us a worse sense of things than they really are. Yes, I think on all metrics things are getting better, but it's not quite the end of the story. I still think like things are a lot worse than they could be given human expertise and scientific understanding. And so for example, the classic example is famine. All famines today are due to politics and war. They're not due to
lack of food.
An absence of food on the planet. There are way fewer famines than there used to be, and that's brilliant. But it's also kind of scandalous that there are any.
Yeah.
So it's all a question of which perspective you come from, whether you think that like the world is a terrible place and you're going to be depressed about it, or the world is a wonderful place compared to a few hundred years ago, and you're going to be very happy about it. I think we ought to be able to be sort of realistic about it and optimistic in a sense, but not in a way that denies reality. And eventually, this is just the same message I keep saying over and over. But like, if you build a way of looking at the world that involves denying reality, it's going to come and bite you eventually.
Back in 1951, Alan Watts wrote a thin treatise called The Wisdom of Insecurity, where he discusses something called the backwards law. Could you maybe explain what that's about?
Yeah, this little book was sort of partly what spurred me to write my less little book. He basically makes the case that, he talks about how everyone feels incredibly insecure these days, which means like 1951, which is a good reminder that people always feel that their own time in history is the most anxious. and he sort of makes this argument, which has a deep connection to all sorts of spiritual traditions. We could go into that if you like, but that the main reason we feel so insecure in life, or as a society, whatever level you look at it, is because we try so hard to feel secure. So it's the sort of, it's a bit like, quicksand. I don't know that quicksand actually works like this, but the cliche is that if you're stuck in quicksand, the more you struggle to get out, the deeper you get sucked in. And he sort of made this case that in some quite profound sense that I probably can't convey brilliantly in conversation, trying to feel completely safe in the world is like a mistake, because something about life is inherently uncertain and insecure and unknowable and sort of unsafe in a way. And even he would have said this doesn't mean you shouldn't have proper boundaries in relationships and, not let people walk all over you or abuse you or whatever. But that this idea that we're ever going to get to a time in our lives where we feel completely in control, completely secure, and completely safe, like, not only is that not going to happen, but that's the problem. That's the thing. That desire is what's causing you to feel so uncertain and insecure. And if you can somehow sort of see that and get past it, and just sort of give yourself to the uncertainty of the world and the lack of control that we have over how our lives unfold, that's not just like more in tune with reality, but it's actually much more enjoyable way to live, because you're no longer sort of trying to pull yourself out of life into this safe little space. You're sort of diving in instead. So I think that's.
Well, I guess if it's called the backwards law, I guess it would work both ways. So if we're trying to hold on to this idea of security, and in that we're just getting more insecurity, would it work on the flip side? The more that we just embrace this idea of insecurity, by embracing that insecurity, there's a security in that. So I guess, does it work both ways?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think that a lot of people who have, for example, meditated a lot, and, I think this is one of the messages in sort of Buddhist psychology and philosophy, is that, yeah, I mean, you sort of, what's the right way of putting it? If you are able to sort of not mind what happens, in a sense, if you're able to go through life seeing negative emotions when they arise and letting go of them and doing all of that, then really you are, in a certain kind of way, you're sort of indestructible in a sense. I mean, maybe that's overstating it, but instead of sort of covering yourself with armor or building a wall around yourself that could then be knocked down, metaphorically speaking, you're just sort of going out naked into the world, and you can't be you can't have the clothes torn from you if you're already naked, I suppose, if I'm going to continue that metaphor
keep it going. It's good.
To the end. So I think there's something very powerful in that. Some people, there's disagreements to be had. Does it mean you should really, go and do lots of extreme sports so that you're really scared all the time? That will depend on people's personalities. But I think it's really useful to ask, whenever you feel anxious or insecure or worried about the future, to what extent is this arising from this kind of unhelpful desire to get to be somewhere totally safe and secure that you don't really need, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a technique with I just love the name, the Premeditation of Evils. It's a hilarious name.
Yeah.
The Premeditation of Evils. What is that? That ties back to the Stoicism that we were talking about earlier. But yeah, could you explain?
This is great. This is very much, this is great, very much on the level of just a little technique that I think is really helpful. The other way to think about it is as sort of negative visualization. So it's about not the standard thing in self-help and positive thinking is like decide what you want, picture yourself winning the race or the account in the office, whatever, or the huge amounts of money, and then like that'll help it become reality. And there's some evidence that it has, at least for some people, the opposite effect, because it sort of convinces them on a subconscious level they've already achieved the goal, so they stop striving for it. But the Premeditation of Evils flips that on its head and says, if you're feeling anxious about something in the future, really in detail think through and contemplate and visualize the worst thing that could happen. Because usually when we are in any way worried or unhappy about the future, we try to reassure ourselves, right? Or other people, we try to convince ourselves that it's all going to be fine. But this is very fragile because you have to keep replenishing that sense of reassurance. If instead you ask like, well, okay, what if it isn't fine? What could really happen if it isn't fine? It's a much more resilient way of thinking because, firstly, you will probably discover that you were exaggerating things in your head. I think we all have a inbuilt tendency to, treat every worrying thing as the kind of ultimately worrying thing. So small make you anxious, but your emotional reactions are a little bit like you just heard that a nuclear missile has been launched at your city. They're kind of, it might be something very small, but your emotional reactions are as if it was very big. And so the Premeditation of Evils helps bring that down to size because you'll think, well, okay, suppose giving this talk to this group of people, I really did make a fool of myself. Like, what's going to happen? Okay, it would be really embarrassing. A couple of hundred people would think I was stupid. Maybe I'd lose some theoretical work opportunity I was otherwise going to have. Okay, it might be bad, but it isn't like, my house and everyone I know got destroyed in a war or something. So firstly, you cut it down to size. And then secondly, you just sort of, I think you're just sort of more prepared for it. You're not trying to, there's not something you're really trying to not think about anymore. So, even if you are faced by something in life where the answer is, well, actually, it would be really, really bad. It is the worst that could happen. Nonetheless, there's something so sort of freeing about being like, well, okay, I'm allowed to think about that. I don't have to keep this kind of screened off portion of my mind where I'm got to not focus on that. And so it's very sort of empowering in that respect too. So, every day in minor ways, I'm always asking myself, like, okay, well, what's that actual worst case scenario here?
And I guess a big part of it would be the uncertainty, because so the idea of not knowing is often more terrifying. So say, for example, you're in a cafe and on the other table there's an attractive girl and you want to ask them out, and I guess a lot of it's that uncertainty. So if in your head you define, okay, what is the worst? Okay, she stands up and says, are you kidding? Like, what the hell? Like, not a chance. Guys, everyone listen to this. This guy wants to ask you out. Like, haha, like everyone, the whole cafe laughs in your face. If you're going to define it as the worst thing and then you're like, fuck it, and then do it anyway, then by making that uncertainty, by defining your nightmare and you can see it, it almost, it's like, whatever, like you're in your bed, the monster under the bed. By actually defining what the nightmare is, somehow, by giving it a form, makes it less terrifying, because almost the uncertainty is more scary. Because if you
don't give it a form, you just go to 100%, in terms of your catastrophizing. And I think what's really important about all this is that it's just a general way of thinking about life that doesn't rely on kind of, as I say, blocking things out. You can just sort of face everything. And I think meditation helps with that as well. There's kind of like, okay, this stuff can come up in my emotional world. That's okay. I don't need to be like on a tightrope, really, really hoping that certain emotional experiences don't bubble up in me, or that certain situations don't befall me in my life. And then, of course, you can go ahead and do stuff. I mean, I think it's very interesting looking at research into entrepreneurs and what they really do as opposed to what we sort of think they do. And you're often using techniques like this, to be like, okay, I don't know this is going to work, but I've figured out the worst that could happen if it didn't work. That's good enough for me. I'll take the next step. And it's a very sort of motivating thing. I think positive thinking can be very demotivating because it's sort of you feel like you have to be so careful to get every step right.
I have a principle which kind of what you were saying just reminded me of it a little bit. It's whenever I'm going to try something like brand new or like big or scary, whatever, like pack up and move to a different country or whatever, it's either going to be awesome or it's going to be awful, and then you'll get an awesome story out of it. And so I often actually even prefer the second. So if you try something new, it'll either be awesome or awful, and you'll get a good story out of it. And so often if something's such a crash and burn and it's a complete failure, then normally that's the kind of like looking back, that's the material that you can just, that you've got for years to come, when you're at your lowest, or when, you end up sort of without a penny and you're like in a random country. Like those are the kind of amazing stories which I just love. So I almost prefer things when they don't work out, because you get a great story out of it.
No, I totally see that. I think you get to dine out, and also it's another reminder that and this comes across from a lot of the social psychology research, as you probably know. We're terrible at predicting what's going to make us happy or fulfilled anyway. So if you really just relentlessly fixate on some very narrowly defined goals, which is something we're often told we should do, you're going to miss these opportunities, because it's like you're going to decide now this year at this point in history that what the best thing to be doing is in like 3 years' time. It's obviously absurd, I think.
Talking about goals, you just teed me up. Like, you became a big fan not of these big ambitious goals, but actually goals that are so small they're laughable. Tell me about your kitchen timer and maybe some examples of these micro goals.
Well, so I have this kitchen timer that I carry everywhere with me. It lasted a long time. I just had to replace it. It was amazing. It had lasted about like 10 years or something, which no other gadget in my life ever does. Which I would use to sort of all sorts of tricks, like, get started on some work project that I know is important, but I don't feel like doing. I will maybe do like 5 minutes on it or something like that. There are all these techniques there's this thing called the Pomodoro technique that you've probably come across online, where you work for 25 minutes and then take a break for 5 and do that 4 times and then take a longer break, and all these kind of systems to just sort of get you up and running. I think the thing about really tiny goals, that's only one of the things that I'm sort of into, but I think, if you're really finding it difficult to get started on something, a sort of daily habit, for example, I think ridiculously tiny goals are very helpful. Maybe your exercise plan should be to go on a walk for 30 seconds, and then, next day it's 40 seconds. It's stupid, but by definition, things that are stupid can't be scary, right? So you might feel like it's a waste of your time to go on a 30-second walk, but you're not going to feel like it's an intimidating thing that you can't bring yourself to do. If you are into meditation but can't seem to get into it, decide to do at least a minute a day. And like, it's going to happen because it's fine, and then of course you hope to build out from there. But there's somebody I need to give credit for this, and I can't remember who I should credit, but there's somebody who makes the same point about, like, well, if you need to floss your teeth, start with flossing one tooth. Because like that hurdle is so low that you can easily step over it. So I think that's the
problem with a lot of New Year's resolutions. People have like the best intentions, but it's like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. And say, for example, the first few weeks you go 3 times a week, you feel like a failure, and then that, because you haven't hit and then it's crazy. So I think, people's New Year's resolutions should be put on your trainers and then take them off. Wow, every day I got to put on my running shoes and then just take them straight off. Amazing. What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
Wow. I mean, it's so tempting to try to answer that on a philosophical level. And to do that, I would just say, it's a meaningful life more than it's a meaningfulness seems to matter more, I think, than pure happiness. I would rather get to the end of my life and feel like I'd done the things that mattered, rather than that I just made sure that I was feeling good as much as possible in the time. On a more sort of concrete level, in many ways it sounds so cliched. Good, absorbing work, spending time with my family. We have a little baby now, so that's he's a huge source of fulfillment and sleep deprivation, but also fulfillment. I love sort of hiking and spending time with good friends. It's all cliched, right? But there's kind of something interesting about that, which is don't necessarily assume that the thing that will fulfill you the most in life has to be sort of extraordinary to people on the outside. It might be some of these great universal things: work, people, nature, and that's kind of fine. I think daring to be ordinary in certain aspects of one's life is quite an important thing. I didn't give you a speed answer to that speed question.
I just say speed answer. You can take as long as you like. What is one thing our listeners can start doing today that will have a positive impact on their lives?
The thing that currently makes the most difference on that level of technique for me is I do this thing, morning pages, that you've probably heard of and discussed, which is just like I fill 3 sides of a sort of moderately large notebook with complete stream of consciousness writing, pretty much first thing when I get up. It's not because I'm a writer. I'm not trying to sort of plan articles or write stories or anything. It's really just journaling. It's just like whatever is knocking around my mind in the morning. Can be very mundane, can be huge melodramatic problems in my life, whatever, and it's for no one else ever to see. But the point is, you just keep going, you keep the pen moving. Takes me, 30, 35 minutes probably by the time it's done. So it's not a tiny time investment, but it's just weird how much of a difference it makes. Like, maybe it's just because I'm brushing away the cobwebs from my mind before I head off into the day. Sometimes I feel like I do get amazing insights and breakthrough, understandings of things I'm facing or whatever. So it just can't hurt. And there's quite a lot of scientific evidence to back it up now as well, if that's your thing.
What's funny, this kind of ties in a little bit to the micro goals. For some reason, the idea of journaling and keeping a diary, like I wanted to do it for years and years and years, but there was this big resistance where it kind of just felt like homework, and it felt like, I can't be bothered, And then starting with the micro goals, it was, I think I started with just each day, just bullet points, like 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 successes. And the fact that it was just a bullet point, that it was just like, it was such an easy, sure, I can do that in a few minutes. And then what happened was then that suddenly turned into like 2 pages, 3 pages, because I was enjoying it, and it didn't feel like homework. It was just fun and it was enjoyable. But I think if I'd tried to start with it having to be this big thing, then I probably never would have started. So it kind of ties into that idea of micro goals, what you're talking about earlier. That actually got me over the edge of the journaling thing.
Yeah. Instead of 3 sides of a notebook, make it 2 lines of a notebook. If that's what's gonna get you to do it, absolutely. Yeah.
Last but not least, how can people find out more about you and your work? Where can we send them?
I spend too much time on Twitter at Oliver Burkeman, and my website is oliverburkeman.com. There's quite a bit of stuff there. It's in an imminent state of being relaunched, like every writer's website that I know. But and then my books are, where you'd expect to find books.
It's fantastic, and there are some amazing articles there. So Oliver, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been really fascinating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for asking me.